Hi, welcome. This is Dr. John DeMartini. This is one of the most amazing and inspiring shows that you can listen into. If you want to be on the edge of your seats, if you want to open up your heart, if you want to expand your mind, and you want to meet incredible people, stay tuned because you're just about to experience a transformative radio show that will change your life. And you're listening to the Dr. Pat Show that's coming up right next.
The following audio is via a Skype call.
Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dr. Pat Show, and I apologize for the late start. Mercury probably is still hanging out in retrograde here and there, but I got you because I've got you on my phone. Today's show is more than important to me. Benny, let me give you a shout out. Thank you for your patience today, Mr. Benny.
Oh, not a problem, Pat. Welcome, and it's a great day we got in store for us yet again.
Yeah, doggy. Yesterday, you all probably heard me talk about the history of my family. A mom that I found out later in life was addicted to barbiturates, prescription drugs, thanks to Dr. Jacoby. Also alcohol associated with that. Tried to commit suicide, one attempt. And failed, and the second attempt lit the house on fire. And, you know, I talked a little bit about the history of my family. I talked about the fact that several years ago, I pretty much lost my last sister, who had a lifetime and a history of not just addiction and cocaine but also herself and her former husband were in the business. I had another sister that was also part of the addiction trail, alcoholic trail, lost her children first time around. Had a third sister who was my birth sister, 12 years older than me, and passed away on the floor, hospital floor. And so today's conversation is more than important to me. My own journey, my own struggles get summed up pretty well by Nicholas Bush. And it gets summed up pretty well in his book, One by One. Now, I want to just talk about this because this is a big show today. And it's such a big show that in our redesign of our network, we have been asked by various addiction and recovery centers in our redesign of our technology, would we mind considering dedicating a channel to helping people understand the journey, the outcome, the blessings, and the action? Today, this is a memoir of love and loss in the shadows of opioid addiction. And so we want to take you on this journey, not just about loss, but about what it is we should know, what the journey is like, how this can become a life-turning story of hope and action, and looking at the true spirit of this Christmas and this holiday season. Nicholas is joining me here today. Someone that has gone down the path of drug addiction and now is devoted to helping people not just battle addiction in halfway houses and prisons, but he is somebody that is speaking out in the world. One of the things that I know about from his growing up in Wisconsin, and as a matter of fact, Wisconsin is in dire straits of losing some of the funding for Medicaid. One of the things I know is that we are here today and talking about this because it is a conversation that we are just not having in a big way. Nicholas, great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dr. Pat.
I think you and I could probably spend the hour talking about our life's journey, our losses. I was homeless at 17, but I can tell you when all is said and done, the word gratitude does not express the feeling I have for my life. And service does not explain my commitment to helping, in my case, other women. I want to ask you, it doesn't come easy to write a book like the book you have written. Many people may think it does, but there's no other choice you have than to write the book, right? I want to ask you, what is it about this story, this tale? What is it in writing this? What about it has changed you? How have you changed since making the decision to tell your story?
Wow. Yeah. Well, let me first just start by answering your question by saying that, I want to thank you for sharing part of your story as well. That's something that's, I've talked to a lot of people in the recovery community and just abroad, and our stories are very similar, Dr. Pat, and that's really unfortunate. And in writing the book, I want to bring that gratitude that you just mentioned, because you're right, the life we get to live now, like every day, is, it sounds corny, but it's such a blessing. I had a baby just last night, and I can't even, you said it the best, I can't even express the gratitude that I have right now. And in sharing my story, it's like, man, it just brings me so much more than gratitude. It's like just an overflowing, in walking this spiritual recovery journey.
I want to talk about, today we're going to talk about your journey, your spirituality, your relationship with God, my relationship with God, but I want to start at the beginning, because often we don't talk about our beginnings unless we're behind closed doors of maybe a meeting or with a therapist. But, the people that are going through this and going through this journey don't often talk about it. And so we have almost a seductive sense when we say the opioid crisis. Yeah. I got to tell you, maybe you're not going to agree with me, but back in the day, I'm older than you, just saying. But back in the day, the thing that scared the you-know-what out of us was not the word opioid. That is like such. The thing that scared us was the word heroin. Right. What have we done? Why aren't we calling this what it is? But I'm gonna have you hold that question, because that's part of what we're going to talk about. It's not just the evolution of where we are and the crisis we are, but it's the evolution of how this has now taken over a country and countries around the world, not just in isolated populations, right? Not just in the ghettos, but people of all ages, of all colors, of all races and all religions. Where did the story begin for you, Nicholas?
My story of addiction really just, it begins like so many other people, just experimenting, wanting to have a good time, recreational marijuana use, drinking, partying. I'll admit it was a young age, 14, but I soon discovered that myself, like I think all addicts, certainly many addicts, have triggers and vulnerabilities that we didn't even know about, and we find ourselves totally addicted and in over our heads before it's too late, before we even know it hit us. Mm-hmm. And for me, marijuana use was, believe it or not, it was a daily thing at 14, like right away for me. I had a really rough childhood. There's abuse in the home. I found myself bouncing around to different homes a lot, and I rebelled against that abuse, my abusive parents, and pretty hard. And so things pretty snowballed for me as a young teenager, pretty quickly. Ended up a heroin addict maybe 8 years later. About 21, 22, I lost my sister to a heroin overdose. She was a model in Europe at the time, a pre-med student as well, very bright, and that just devastated our whole family. And Believe it or not, the thing about addiction that's so crazy, I actually turned to the very thing that killed her, which was those opioids, all kinds of them, like Oxycontin, synthetic Oxycontin, all different types. And I found myself doing, heroin before long as well. And I had 2 near-death experiences. I experienced paralysis, disease. I went to jail 5 or 6 times for, drug-related offenses. And believe it or not, I actually did lose my brother as well, to my sister and my brother, as, we talked about when your show began. He passed away 5 years after our sister from, it just spiraled down a trail that started with marijuana and went into all the opioids. And it ended with heroin. As soon as I got into heroin, it just kind of killed him. And that's a really common trajectory that I've found in working with addicts at rehab facilities and so forth.
Yeah. And it's a very commonsensical one if you're familiar with this population and with the dynamic of this, right? I mean, let's just talk about it from what actually is going on out there. Back in the day and still today, one of the cheapest drugs you can get on the street, right, at the time was heroin. And I don't think that's changed very much. It now comes in a different form. I think growing up for us, we had this vision, if we could, of the heroin addict in a dark alley with a needle in his or her arm. We have certainly now moved on to a different stage of this, where that doesn't have to necessarily be the path that somebody takes. It's way more accessible. But unless we truly tell the story that you're telling today, and we are talking about this not just from the perspective of, yeah, we're now here and we're alive and we're grateful, but this could be you or your child, and these are the things you should know. How was it that you or your family member, because let's talk about some of the things in the book, I was surrounded with a family of denial. I mean, it wasn't until decades later did I actually find out what really happened to my mom, because she left a series of letters. I also found out that she probably was using those drugs and was getting regular prescriptions when she was carrying me. And, we now fast forward to where we are, we've gotten a lot smarter. What are some of the aspects of your journey that we need to make sure the world knows about?
Sure. Well, just what you and I are doing right now, Dr. Pat, is so key to really not just addicts, but their friends, their family, anyone who's affected by severe addiction, to find a recovery community, someone you can talk to. People are afraid to say anything a lot of times because of the guilt and the shame, and they don't want to lose their job, they don't want to lose their friends, their status, whatever. And there are ways to find support, and that is so key for anyone who's going through recovery in any way. Anyone who's touched by addiction and recovery needs to find deep relationships with supporters. And seek and you'll find is my experience when it comes to that. There are so many people out there who just want to help you. And, people like you and I, Dr. Pat, are able to turn around and offer a helping hand once we've received help. And that's kind of how it works. And so that's it in a nutshell. The other thing I would say is there's definitely a spiritual component involved to the
definitely
with addiction. And just like life, spiritual stuff is out there. It's real. And when it comes to this, treating this disease, believe it or not, the spiritual component is very central to the way that the disease of addiction gets dealt with. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of this too is that when we look at the roots of, let's just call it a drug habit, right? And we think and we go back to our childhood, for example. I don't know about you, but I cannot think of a single person that I've worked with over time or supported or someone in a homeless shelter that doesn't have a childhood that most people couldn't comprehend. Now, some are worse than others, but when we sit down and we hear each other's stories, right, you know, the general population, if they were to hear some of the stories of what some of the childhoods were like for what we now call drug addicts and alcoholics, they wouldn't really have a sense. It almost sounds like, how are these people even existing? But let's talk about that, because, yeah, even in the wealthiest of families, there could be abuse. There could be things in the home. And right now, this addiction has no social economic status line that divides. This is something that is hitting every dimension of life. Isn't that what you found as well?
Addiction certainly does not discriminate. It's a killer, and you know, it's not limited to drugs for certain. But you know, I think we're getting more and more into the spiritual component, and because you touched on how people who are pretty well off, you know, struggle with certain things. We're seeing like celebrities and stuff who you know, commit suicide and things like that. It's like, how are these people not happy? And that applies to us. Like, how are these people happy? They've lost everything. They've faced prison, death. They've lost loved ones. You know, they've had it so rough. How are they like wholesome human beings living, you know, what seems like a good life? And here I am, you know, upset about my electric bill or whatever. And that's where that spiritual component comes in. It really, really is.
I want to ask you, this is really for many people, they're probably wondering why we're talking about the spiritual component. I will tell you that it is my opinion that I don't know how one recovers without it. I would like you to talk about that a little bit from your own perspective. And I'm very, very careful about the way I talk about this, because, you know, we do know that this is not something that just hits the Christian population or the Catholic population or the Protestant population. This is something that has no discrimination between what religion or spiritual practice you have. But let's talk about the key component of going through recovery with that spiritual component and why this is about love and loss.
Sure. When it comes to, you know, I certainly have a lot of experience in walking the recovery walk. Be that as it may, you know, good or bad, it's just the way it is. And so, pardon me for a moment while I gather my thoughts. This is such an important, such an important question here. With the experts, the guys with AA, man, that's when you go to the hospital, when you have a near-death overdose and they realize you are an addict, there's no hiding it, you need help, you need treatment, what do? We you know, the gig is up. They send you to rehab, and in rehab, the treatment is, you know, group therapy with AA, essentially. Okay, yep. That's what the medical professionals, the doctors, the experts, that's what they have to offer, and that's, honestly, it's wonderful. That's a huge part of getting sober and getting back on your feet is the community, the 12 steps, and they do absolutely agree with, honestly, us when it comes to the spiritual dynamic, because Bill Wilson, who started AA, had a spiritual encounter that set him free from, you know, really radical experience. I encourage your listeners to look into this. The founder of AA, Bill Wilson, had a really spiritual encounter while he was in a mental institution. He was, you know, medically speaking, they gave up all hope on him. He was completely delirious and, you know, had gone off his rocker on alcohol. He was just an alcoholic and was in a mental institution. You know, he was a war veteran, decorated World War I hero, and he was afflicted with this disease. They didn't know what to do, and long story short, he has this radical spiritual encounter in the mental institution, and he founds AA. He gets sober. He gets his sanity back. He writes the book on the 12 steps, and there's now, you know, a global fellowship on it. They have a chapter dedicated to, you know, the spiritual dynamic, largely called, it's largely about the spiritual dynamic called We Agnostics. Now, a lot of addicts are atheists, okay? And they don't want to hear about this spiritual stuff for, whatever reason. And we agnostics goes into detail about how it is so important. If you want to get sober, it could only hurt to reach out to a higher power. Without help, we're going to die of this disease. For us, it's really severe. We're not addicted to coffee here. We're killing ourselves with living a double life with drugs, with alcohol, and we really need help. And it can't hurt to reach out to the possibility of there being, they call it a higher power, God, whatever you want to call it.
I think they're really clear about this being the God of your understanding.
They are, yes.
Right? Which means you get to choose it.
Yes. And so they're very encompassing, welcoming, like I just said, all-encompassing of any spiritual belief. I've worked with Muslims, Jews, Christians, atheists, people who scorn recovery. On down the line. And it's just a part of the process is, taking it seriously is the key. And you can really see tremendous results. I'm sure you can attest to that as well, Dr. Pat.
Yeah. One of the things we're going to talk about is how seriously important this is. And not only that, what is it we want to know about Nicholas's book, One by One? What is it that the message for today has to do, what is it about the message that has to do with saving lives in many ways? And for those of you out there, if you really want to get the skinny on Bill W., you can Google Bill W. and Carl Jung, because one of the very little known facts about this is very early on, it was Carl Jung who didn't get credit until Bill W. wrote him in 1961. But it was Carl Jung early on that said, I am not able to help this person. This person is going to need a spiritual experience. And why is it that Carl Jung, one of the greats of the greats, this Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, what was it about himself that said way back that alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness expressed in medieval language, the union with God? Carl Jung, the craving was the equivalent of that. That's why today's conversation goes beyond how to hold back on prescriptions written. This is about, let's understand what a possible pathway could be for people to restore hope in their lives. Let's take a short break.
Is traditional medicine not working for you? Do you still feel as if your health isn't 100%? Here at the Holistic Medical Center, Dr. Nushin Darvish and the qualified staff look through the dimensions of wellness and start a healing plan prioritized to your needs. Our physicians assess the whole you until complete health is achieved. Get the help you need by visiting drdarvish.com or call 425-451-0404.
Have you lost a loved one and would desperately love a sign to prove that they are okay? Here's a tip for you. Be curious. Keep an open mind about everything. The proof will come from the most unlikely places. The messages promise to challenge your current beliefs in what you've been taught. Accept and appreciate all, no matter where they come from. I'm Angie Corbett Kuiper. I would love for you to share your signs from beyond on my closed Facebook page, Beyond Grief.
Are you ready to create a life you'll really love? Then you'll want to tune in to the hit show Life Design Radio, From Adversity to Awesome with Susan DiLorenzo. Live each month on TransformationTalkRadio.com. No matter where you are in your adversity story, Life Design Radio has got you covered. Get ready to feel inspired, enlightened, and motivated. For more information about working with Susan, visit SusanDiLorenzo.com.
Tune in to Lucid Planet Radio with Dr. Kelly Neff. This hit show will illuminate your senses and empower you beyond your daily stressors and hardships. Renowned psychologist and author Dr. Kelly will captivate you with far-reaching topics and amazing guests as you wake to the greatest version of yourself. Learn to tap into your intuitions, think critically about our world, heal emotional and psychological wounds, and follow your passions to live your dreams. The Lucid Planet. Welcome home. Visit lucidplanetradio.com for more information.
Have you heard the story of the snake and the rope? One evening, a young woman was walking down a country road. It was growing dark. Suddenly, she froze. Up ahead was a coiled snake. She was terrified. She reached into her bag for a flashlight and directed the beam of light towards the snake. Now she was flooded with relief. It was just a piece of old rope. That snake stands for all our imaginary fears and insecurities that sap our confidence. The beam of light is conscious confidence. Ask yourself, how many snakes did I see today? How many actions or words did I stifle through fear? Hi, I'm Sarah Main, creator of Conscious Confidence. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Pat, for Conscious Confidence Radio on transformationtalkradio.com. Learn more about how you can live a life filled with conscious confidence. Go to my website, consciousconfidence.com.
Well, welcome back, everyone. One by one, a memoir of love and loss in the shadows of opioid America. Nicholas Bush joining me here as the author. Benny, let's go ahead and give a copy of the book away if we could. 1-800-930-2819, 1-800-930-2819. Nicholas, I want to talk a little bit about the book and what's in it. Take us on a brief journey of not just about what you wrote about, but what the messages you wanted to convey, because you pretty much don't hold back.
Right, and I don't know how to hold back. You know, the guy you're talking to was a completely different person. I was, into drugs and a criminal for about 10 years, and I don't think I could go 10 words without swearing. I didn't talk much. I didn't really, have many friends. I was just a mean guy, and I was kind of shaped by my environment growing up as a kid. I got in a lot of fights and so my book is about how it's just the journey I took once I started using drugs. Once I turned to drugs at 14, I didn't think much of it. It just kind of was the way life was for me. And, that it really is just a really brief backdrop on my childhood, and then the journey of the 10 years I spent going to, in and out of jail, like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Pat, on your show, and losing my brother and sister to drug overdoses, 3 other friends to drug overdoses. 2 of my other friends were shot to death. One of them during a drug deal gone bad, and the other at a late-night bar fight. Gangs were involved, and my life was really just this wild, crazy tale. And, how can you hold back when you've lived a life like that? And so my book really does take the reader on a wild journey of what it's like to be an addict, how somebody ends up a heroin addict, an IV heroin addict, using heroin every day, and just into that life. And more importantly, Dr. Pat, and I really want to talk to you about this, is how I was able to come out of it and become the man that I am today. And, I said earlier I had a baby last night. My wife is inside in the hospital, and
congratulations.
Thank you. I just have such a changed life that I live now, and I owe it to the experience that I've had with recovery. What I've found during this whole process, this whole journey, is something that I want to share with the reader.
It's important to share it, because unless you've been down this pathway, right, it is very difficult for the general public to understand what the journey to recovery is like. And, your story is more than compelling, right? Because not only did you go down the pathway of addiction, but the consequences that are associated with it. See, there are consequences, Nicholas. And, while it's hard for us to talk about those, how do we help people rise up beyond that. Because if we can't instill hope in people and really demonstrate that besides your past and the things that you identified with, know that there could be a future. Isn't that what your book is about as well?
Yes, and that is, I'm loving it. That's exactly what I was about to mention, Dr. Pat, because I don't care who you are. I don't care where you've been. I had lost all hope. I knew I was going to die. I knew I was headed to prison. I would wake up in the morning and say to myself, maybe today's the day. And I meant it. And, at one point I was just so afraid of being rounded up by the police. I was hiding in my parents' basement. They didn't know I was there. Going from utter hopelessness, no future, no chance, huge long criminal record, where just nothing going for me, completely addicted to heroin, active investigations open, headed to prison. And here I am to tell you that, I've made it out. And it can be overcome. You can find, your spiritual center to the point where you can overcome anything, okay? It doesn't have to be just addiction. And that's the real message, behind my book. I gave you the Christmas present early there, but there's just some swell details. Let me tell you that I've written. It really is a wild journey, okay? And I'll share one of those details with you right now.
Please.
After my sister had passed away, she was a model in Europe, as I mentioned, a pre-med student at Madison, Wisconsin. And, she struggled with shingles disease, which is a nerve pain condition, very rare in young people, but it happens. And so she kind of hid that from everybody, and she became addicted to opioid medication and was kind of shopping around with that, ended up doing, heroin apparently, and died. And no one knew she was into this stuff. She came to me 6 months later after she died in a vision when I was homeless and strung out on drugs. And she told me to love Christ. And as I mentioned, I had lost all hope. I knew I could die today. And I just accepted that. And the next thing I know, my sister, who had just passed away 6 months ago, shows up and tells me to love Christ. And that's what set me on my path that has led me to freedom. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is really the story you hear time and time and time and time again. And we hear it over and over again. We hear it in terms of, and we mostly are hearing it from this country because, by the way, in other countries, for example, in India, women that drink, let alone women that drink and use, they are completely unacceptable, as is in most other countries. So the United States really has a population which absolutely knows no difference. You could be from a religion that your practice in another country would not allow you to talk about addiction and recovery. And so for those folks here in the United States, it's hard for them to be able to show up and get help. They're really the unspoken population of addiction in this country. If you are either Catholic or Christian, so to speak, the world is open to you to step forward in recovery. And I think that's really the difference. You and I can only talk about those religions or spiritual practices where people are allowed to come forward and say, I need help. We have millions of people that are not in a position to do that in different cultures in this country. So when we talk about a crisis, we're not even representing an appropriate number. We're only talking about a crisis of what we know. You know what I'm saying? I mean, how many people, Nicholas, did you know that couldn't come out about it, period?
It really is an epidemic, and the numbers that are provided, there's no way that that's accurate because we're dealing with a problem that's so hidden. Just, as you're talking, I'm thinking of all the people that I've met, we're mentioning, different faith circles here I've met people in the church that just tell me flat out they can really relate to the things we're talking about, even though you would never guess. You know what I mean? And so many people are falling through the cracks. I could share my opinion.
That's a good term. That's a good term.
You're really hitting the nail on the head here. As far as, having faith and spirituality being a dividing thing, that is so backwards. I just want to say right now that no matter what faith you're from, we're all human beings. And even if you don't know what you believe or you don't care, we all need love and need to give it. And when it comes to addiction, it's like so prevalent that we're aware, of the spiritual component that we're discussing. And I want to thank you, Dr. Pat, for having me on to do just that.
Yeah, it's got to be talked about. I mean, I use Carl Jung as 1934 or something like that. Jung, 33, 34. The very first case that was pointed towards Bill W.'s way was a case where Carl Jung couldn't help them through psychological means. And yet today, we are still trying to help people through psychological and psychiatric means. And honestly, if a Carl Jung couldn't do it, I don't understand in today's world how much smarter we may have gotten to realize. In my own profession of psychology, one of the things that for me, once I finished school, I had to look at was, am I going to practice this without being able to practice a spiritual component? And now the doors have opened up wider. But when I graduated in 2001, came to the state of Washington, I couldn't do that. So I wouldn't have been able to see people and add like meditation, right? Or a spiritual component. And many of my colleagues walked away from psychology, especially at the PhD level, because we knew better. See, this is what you're talking about. You're talking about a knowing that could save lives. And I work and pray that psychology and the field of psychiatry catches up to this. You know what I mean?
I do. And it's the spiritual dynamic, honestly, that I think you're saying the same thing here, which is science has known for a long time that there's a spiritual component involved, yet it's really unable to sort of put it in a pill and give it to you to take. Free will is involved here. We have to recognize that we as human beings need to stop being so judgmental of others. And it's the Christmas season.
Yeah, it is.
And so I just want to touch again on the dynamic of spirituality. With that, I think it's a lot of people view it as stepping on toes and things like that. It's kind of a controversial topic, but it's one of those things where it's really how you look at it. I think if you want to see, if you're Muslim, Jew, whatever, in that doctrine, there really is, a heart behind it to like love others and help others. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the perspective everyone needs to have when it comes to, normally I would take a step back here or whatever. It's like, okay, this is a deadly disease that we're facing, like a wildfire. You know what I mean? Thankfully in California, that's they're getting some weather out there to put that out. That's been awful.
But you're right about it. Yeah, Nicholas, here's what you're right about. Addiction knows no boundary when it comes to religion, socioeconomic status. It doesn't. I got to ask you this question because I've actually been called out a little bit on it.
Sure.
Why is it, do you think, that we're just not calling it what it is? And let me tell you what I mean. We use the term opioid, right? But we're starting to look at that, not we, but organizations that count things are starting to look at it. And it seems like opioid, right? The term opioid, which comes from it's no mistake, opium, opioid, right?
Yes,
but are we confusing people with it? And let me tell you what I mean. It sounds as if we call it opioid, it may not be or sound as serious as if we called it heroin. I don't know. What do you think? Are we confused about it? Are we trying to confuse the public?
No.
I mean, why are we just calling things what they are?
I do. In my book, I call it government heroin. It's sought after more than heroin. The government makes better drugs than what's available on the street. And money, to answer your question in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. And we've got to admit that when it comes to hearing about these epidemics and, all this stuff, if it's something that you just really can't wrap your head around, look, we're facing a monster here that honestly, I don't know if it's so big, there's so much money involved that we could go up and up and up and out and out and out. And we're getting into, world conflicts and things like that, discussions about why there is an epidemic, and getting to your question with, why don't we call it how it is and call it what it is and just say what's going on. I think, in my book, I title it One by One, because this huge problem that's got all these facets to it, it's got to be faced. It's got to be addressed on an individual level, and that's where we as individuals, as addicts, people in recovery, have to focus and put our efforts. And of course, society at large will change as individual opinions, as individual lives begin to change. Society at large will definitely follow suit. Things will happen. We'll have changes in the judicial system, things like that. But money. We're facing a huge monster here. We've got to unify. We've got to be aware of everything we've been talking about, honestly, and in combating this evil of this opioid epidemic.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit. I know that we've got a few minutes left here. One of the things that we should really talk about is educating ourselves, educating our kids, and then educating our adults as we get older, right? I mean, we absolutely need to look at what are we really talking about. Clearly, the National Institute on Drug Abuse does a fairly good job at coming through and saying this is what it is. In any event, people have a really hard time going from, I went to the dentist and I got a prescription, and now I'm addicted. And that's not the way it happens. There's like a step missing, right? But we're not talking about the step. We're not talking about, the step that says, I finished my prescription and I somehow magically got from my local neighbor more pills. There's that missing piece that we're not talking about. And I wanted to ask you about this from your perspective. It seems like we want to point to the doctors that write the scripts. Now, of course, you have to get like an act of Congress, right, to for any lengthy thing that goes on with that. But aren't we missing something here between I got a prescription from my dentist and now I'm homeless? I mean, doesn't your book share that gap? Because if we don't get the gap, we're not going to be able to stop this, even when the doctors stop giving out prescriptions.
So what you're really talking about is wholeness that a person either has or doesn't have. As it's possible to live with feeling like there's something missing and you don't know what it is, and you try a drug at a dentist office, like you said, or whatever party, and you find that it fills that hole for you, and you just desire that feeling and you can't shake it, and it turns into a behavioral disease, a mental illness. And so really what we're treating is that emptiness. A lot of experts, like yourself, Dr. Pat, have talked about how it's trauma related in most cases, and I'd have to, I can relate to that. I think once again, this is kind of where you get into that spiritual dynamic, and it can be a little bit frustrating, kind of trying to nail down and articulate what's behind the method of making a drug addict. You know what I mean? Like why people are the way they are. But I think one thing we can know for certain is that community and fellowship really helps a person, and it can stem the problem early on. Being open and honest, about these things with our loved ones, and not seeing, AA or NA or a church group or some kind of fellowship devoted to sobriety and helping people in recovery that needs to be encouraged. Okay, that's a central part of how medically this problem of addiction gets treated, and I think that'll continue to do a lot of good. Okay, and
well, doesn't that really though point to the fact that those programs, whether it's AA, NA, any of the A's, they really have to take a look internally at what their guidelines are as to whether or not they're going to reach out and do some outreach. Look at the 2017 trend. You ready for this? I thought hallucinogenics were like gone since like I grew up. Here's the deal that's happening. 12th graders, 6.7% of 12th graders are using hallucinogenics. What? I'm looking at these statistics, right? 5% LSD.
Yeah.
This thing is so far out of control if we don't look at what you're talking about, and that is the whole picture, right? I mean, as growing up in a crazy time to grow up, many of us knew better. Are we doing enough to educate people on this? Because I've looked at these statistics, right? And, ages 26 and older, Nicholas, 17% of the population, hallucinogenics, 10% LSD, PCP, 3%. People might be saying, oh, that's not a lot. 17% of 26 and older. We're not even talking about that, right? And hopefully what you've written in your book and your outreach and the shows you're doing and the television things you're doing, maybe you can put, at least temporarily, get the attention of folks to say, you gotta look at all of this going on. I mean, I want to get back to something else you said. I know we got like 3 minutes left.
Okay.
What do you make of the legalization of marijuana? I know that's 3 minutes left. I don't give you enough time to say. But yes or no? Yeah. I mean, how many stories do we have to hear that start with that, right?
Sure. And that's a great question. And, I could talk about that for an entire hour. But to give you a succinct answer, I would say I wish it didn't exist. I wish the opioid epidemic didn't exist. I wish these were things that we as a society didn't have to deal with. But, it's not something that it is, and it's not something that really scares me too much because the way it's been coming into legalization and stuff like that, I think it's being done well. And even though I don't agree with it, it's being done in such a way that, doesn't scare me. I think it does have some medical purposes. But if you're going to do this, and believe me, the United States and Canada, they basically have already done it and they're doing it. You've got to educate, okay? And you've got to let the public know, like, hey, if you don't watch it, like, this could lead to something deadly. And just because it's becoming recreationally legal doesn't make it necessarily a good thing, And the last thing I'll say, will it affect the numbers of the opioid epidemic with marijuana legalization coming into play? I hope so. I don't know if it'll be a long-term solution. I hope so. Anything that'll help that, I hope so. But that remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see.
Nicholas, thank you so much. Please tell folks how they can find out more about you and how they can get a copy of the book. The book is One by One, a memoir of love and loss in the shadows of opioid America. This book, by the way, folks, is a must-read. Bring it into your homes, bring it into your family. Please share it. How can they find out more about you?
If you want to get my book, you can check it out on Amazon, One by One, a memoir of love and loss in the shadows of opioid America. It's also at Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. I'm also on Facebook. You can talk to me personally, Nicholas Bush on Facebook. I'll be happy to chat it up with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I did mispronounce the title, A Memoir of Love and Loss in the Shadows of Opioid America. My brain is already past America. You know what I'm saying? But thank you.
It's okay. No, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicholas. And please keep on going, man. Kid, don't stop. Don't stop. Happy holidays to you.
You too.
I love it. For those of you out there, you will hang on to every word Nicholas has written in this book. Please get a copy of the book. It is amazing. Find a way to share it. Find a way to help your fellow friends and family through his journey. His loss and his love were for all of us so that we can help others. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for doing what you all do so best. You're the best listeners on the planet. We've got more coming up on Transformation Talk Radio. And please find out more. If you've missed any part of this, go to transformationtalkradio.com. Listen to the archive. We'll see you next time.
The preceding audio was via a Skype call.